What's happening, my brothers and my sisters? Today, what I want to get into is the subject of Salvation OCD and get some advice from John Bunyan that could be a help and encouragement to your healing and freedom journey. We're going to talk about John Bunyan's advice for Salvation OCD. So welcome to the healing and freedom journey. Mark DeJesus here. I am your brother from another mother, bringing you insights along the way. I'm all about mental, emotional, and relationship health. And if you are too, you have arrived at a great place. The odds are that in clicking on this video and watching it, you have some obsessive compulsive battles that you're recognizing. Or at the bare minimum, you're recognizing that the way you relate to God and the subject of salvation gets a bit confusing, gets a bit difficult, and you struggle with a sense of your standing with God, and you spin about it. You spin about it quite frequently. It has created a lot of anxiety, a lot of unsettled emotions, and for many, even deep torment. And of course, I've done a lot of work in talking about scrupulosity and OCD in my book, The OCD Healing Journey, which is available. You can get it now and take a dive and journey into what it looks like to experience greater healing and freedom. And I've worked with a lot of people in this area and the distortions that come about. And mainly what it starts with is a sense of disconnection. And if you followed my material at all, a lot of mental health comes out of a sense of disconnect, feelings of disconnect, feeling disconnected from God, from ourselves, from the world around us, from reality around us. When that disconnect happens, it creates a chain reaction. Now, the disconnect usually comes out of our sense of interpretation, where you're feeling low, you're feeling not connected, you're feeling anxious, and there becomes this interpretation. This must mean your salvation is at stake, and you got to do something about it. And those who have Salvation OCD, they've done those things. They've jumped through those hoops. It's become a compulsive activity. And a lot of it becomes ruminating, spinning, arguing with the thoughts, trying to debate back, trying to fuss over their thinking, because you fuss a lot over your sense of standing with God. His grace and his love are very difficult and very challenging to connect and receive. So in this process, your feelings get hijacked, especially your fight or flight, the alarm system that your body was created with to run from a bear or run from something dangerous, or to deal with a stressor at hand. But for those with Salvation OCD, that stressor is interpreted as something is wrong with your standing with God. Now, your faith grid could have a big influence on this, because there's those in certain streams that would say, well, you must have lost your salvation. You had it, but then you lost it. And those that would be in a different stream of emphasis in Christianity would say, well, you can't lose it, but you know what it is? You've never really had a genuine salvation to begin with. And I'm going to get into John Bunyan's advice in just a moment. I want to give you a couple perspectives to help you along the journey, because many of you watching this video, you have already tried a bunch of things that have become compulsive for you. You've asked pastors and teachers for reassurance, for clarity. You've done constant reading, constant Google searching, constant chasing, or maybe you've gotten to the point where anybody mentioning the subject creates an avoidance where it becomes fearful to even hear about the issue. You go through your social media feed and somebody makes a statement about getting your salvation right or getting right with God, and it sends a flurry of anxious emotions throughout your body. So you may find yourself repeating a sinner's prayer over and over again, or repeating a salvation experience. I know that growing up, I found myself in many stages kind of doing this, like, okay, God, I really believe in Jesus. Okay, I really have this. I'm really going to make sure. But then you're checking, rechecking your emotional state, trying to get yourself, now I really believe. Any sense of doubt, any sense of uncertainty, any sense of anxiety is flagged as super highly important. You super overreact to it, and you feel heavily responsible to do something about it. And there are many factors that contribute to this, but I do know that the church world that you grew up in can unknowingly contribute to it. I don't want to look at the church and go, yeah, it's their fault, because many times they're bringing an emphasis, but they don't realize what it's doing to many who have obsessive compulsive tendencies and struggles, or some would call a guilt complex, those who are vulnerable to condemnation, they will emphasize, are you really, really saved? If you were to stand before God today, if you were to die today, a constant inspection of, are you right with him? But there's a heavy-handed fear and condemnation, even legalism that's brought about. A lot of religious perfectionism, a lot of law-based pressure. And it gets a reaction out of people because when you use fear, it can get a response. It can manipulate people's emotions. It can manipulate those who are very, very vulnerable to being manipulated by guilt, being manipulated by fear. And they may respond and try to fix, but then they find themselves in constant spirals. Now, I want to say this before we get into what John Bunyan did. I understand, and I want to give you a little bit of background, because I, as someone who's been in pastoral ministry, both in a large church and small church, can understand why preachers, whatever stream they're in, they want to make sure that people know that they are saved, make sure their salvation is sure. I remember during the years where I worked at a larger church, and the church I worked at, they had a membership process. Well, whatever you feel about church membership, it's not the point. But we as staff members would be involved in doing an interview process to just get to know the person, to confirm their journey, their walk with God. We would spend a lengthy time together just talking through, having conversation. And I noticed in a lot of my conversations with people in the church, many of them I knew and rubbed shoulders with, but this was an opportunity to get to know them in a deeper way. And I found so many times where I would say, tell me about your salvation experience. Tell me about your conversion experience. And a number of times I would hear this statement. And those of you that have OCD issues, even you would go, that's a bit concerning. I would ask them the question, and this is what many would say. Well, I've just kind of known God my whole life. And it would just kind of be like that. And I would find myself going, yeah, I think we need to talk about this a little bit more. And every OCDer I've talked to, when I've mentioned this in my experience, they've gone, okay, yeah, I get you. That's something that needs a further look at, to kind of look at this in a way of like, well, let's make your salvation experience solid, right? But then there's so many that if, they've been told, if you don't remember the day, the hour, the minute, the second, and the moment, and know everything about it and have record of it exactly, and then some people are like, I didn't know the hour. I remember the moment, but I don't remember the exact time of day. We start spinning. And then there's those who've had that moment and have had hundreds of them. And they keep going to the altars. They keep trying to fix it. They keep trying to make it happen. And what they need to understand is this isn't a salvation issue. This is a obsessive distortion issue. And it's infecting how they see their journey with God. And all 7 of these distortions are at play. And they get tripped up in number 3, which is the interpretation. They interpret their feelings as verifying they're not really saved, or they're not really with God, or they're a reprobate, or they're lost, and they're outside of the beloved. And then they find themselves in number 7, constantly spinning over their emotions, checking their emotions, looking at their emotions, and hyper-inspecting them. One of the key things I want to get to the point of is when you work through OCD, there comes a point in time where you're going to have to face the fear and face the uncertainty and face the doubt without feeding it any longer. It's screaming, it's yelling at you, but you're no longer going to serve it. You're no longer going to keep responding to it as a troll, because when you feed a troll, the troll just keeps getting bigger. So if you keep checking and checking and checking and trying to fix, you're now in compulsive behavior. And so eventually there comes a point in time where you need to move on. Now, many with Salvation OCD will resist on this. No. I can't receive the rest of the Bible. I can't receive anything else until I get this thing resolved. And it keeps them from actually growing in the faith and actually taking steps forward, so they feel the stagnancy in their life. Because they're like, I can't move forward until I get this thing. Then they interpret that stagnancy as another verification that they're not saved. So it's going to have to be a change of our relationship with fear, doubt, and uncertainty. That we are not going to chase doubts down and try to get ourselves into a place of feeling perfect certainty, because that's going to develop a poor relationship with doubt, a poor relationship with uncertainty. And we're not going to let fear be our boss anymore. So the reason that I bring up John Bunyan, many of you know him as the author of Pilgrim's Progress, but he also wrote a book called Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners. And much of his writing has older language to it, so some of it's a little bit rough to read through. But many of you know that John Bunyan himself had a case of the spinnies. He had a case of OCD. He had a case of scrupulosity, as many times it's called. It's OCD in a religious form when it infects your faith system, which I believe that people with OCD who are Christians, no matter where it goes, there is some aspect where it impacts their faith walk with God, even though that may not be the screaming topic that shouts out at them. But there's a quote that I found from his book, and I said, you know what? This exemplifies the leap of faith that we're taking in this journey. Because many of you are like Peter, stepping out of the boat and walking on water in this. You feel great fear. You feel great uncertainty. You're always checking for it. You're always feeding it. And today's a day where you can take a new step and change your relationship with how you relate with fear. Because fear is a big part of this scrupulosity battle. And here's what he said in his book. He said, I am for going on. This is him speaking of taking a step forward. I'm going to move forward in my faith and venturing my eternal state with Christ, whether I have comfort here or no. He's saying, if I get reassurance or I don't, if I don't have that perfect sense of assurance to land in, okay, I'm still going to move forward. If God doth not come in, thought I. So that sense of like, I have this expectation for God to just like come in and just help me with this. But if it doesn't seem to happen, he says, I will leap off the ladder, even blindfold, into eternity. You see, there does come a place where a sense of boldness needs to rise up, not because you feel it, not because you've got everything lined up, but a sense of, I'm tired of these thoughts holding me captive and keeping me from taking steps forward in my faith. So he says, I will leap off the ladder, even blindfolded, into eternity. Sink or swim, come heaven, come hell, Lord Jesus, if thou wilt catch me, do. If not, I will venture for thy name. I remember telling a story where, and for many, this spun them out a bit because they took me so literally, they didn't know how to handle it. In my journey, my form of this and spinning about my standing and my eternity with God, I remember just being riddled with a sense of condemnation, a sense of hell. And I was listening to thoughts of condemnation as though I was a non-believer. And so as I began to understand and discern condemnation more in my life and get myself free from its shackles, there was a point of facing it where I made this statement. And I said, I was driving in my car one evening on my way home, and I said, you know what? If I'm going to hell, then I'm going to worship God for eternity from hell. Now, many people heard this and they took me literally. And they're like, what are you talking about? You're embracing hell? And it caused their anxiety to crank up because they took me black and white literally. No, what I was doing was I was facing the troll of these thoughts and saying, I'm moving forward in my life and in my journey. That moment didn't just snap everything, but it propelled me to take more and more steps along my life to stop inspecting and checking this area, because when I do, it's only going to feed a burden of myself, false responsibility, pressure and performance, trying to get all this stuff right, control issues, and more and more and more. I was tired of the spinning, and I needed to take a new step. And so this quote is a older language way of expressing time to take a step forward. John Bunyan, in his struggle, said, I got to do this. And you and I, we got to do this as well, too. You can take that step of faith today. And I encourage you, as a part of your journey, get a copy of the OCD Healing Journey that can help you take the next step and walk this in day by day, step by step. Do me a favor. If this video helped you at all, click the like button and click subscribe. That would help me out a whole lot. And go over to markdejesus.com where you can find out more about resources, materials to support your journey. In fact, I have a page that's all on OCD help. It's all organized, foundational videos for helping you break through the turmoil that obsessive compulsiveness, scrupulosity can try to bring to your life in your journey. Lodwell and the Creek Don't Rise. This is your brother from another mother saying, I'll be back with more insights for your healing and freedom journey. But in the meantime, I'm out.